everybody, and welcome back to my channel. For those of you joining me for the first time, my name is Melissa Reed and I am a mixed media artist from southwestern Pennsylvania. All right, so today we're going to get back to making an actual piece of art, but I've got some new supplies here that I ordered off of Amazon actually. So I've got several different stamps. This is like some music notes. This is some really small writing. This is also some writing. And it's that kind of writing that's not really meant to be read. Not quite a writing, but similar to that. These are just some patterns and some bricks. I don't know which of these we're going to be using today, but I'm probably going to play with some of them. This is what I'm really excited about. I have been looking at getting this little flower stamp forever, and I finally bit the bullet and bought it on Amazon. I'm gonna have links to all of this stuff for you if you're interested in finding any of it. I've seen several other artists use this, and I love the way these little flowers look. This is what it looks like underneath. Very, very sharp in there. It makes these really, oops, let me unhook it there. It makes these really, really cute little flowers. This is actually a hydrangea punch that I have here, and it makes these cute little flowers, and it pops out 5 of them at a time in different sizes. I've seen lots of other artists use these, like I said, but I have been wanting to get one of these myself, and I finally did. So underneath here, I have this shadow box that I picked up at Michael's a while back and never did anything with yet. But my plan for this was always to do some sort of like art with like a 3-dimensional element to it. So this is going to be perfect for that, because I don't necessarily want these to all lay flat, although I will to some degree, and you definitely could, but I'm thinking about doing something where they're a little more dimensional in some way. Don't know exactly what the outcome is going to look like yet, but I do know that that is where I'm going to be headed. So this is going to be a great chance for me to use up some of the collage papers that I've been making, and possibly even make some new ones if there's a specific color or pattern that I'm looking for that I don't have. So my first step is going to be, I have a piece of this watercolor paper that I got from Hippie Crafter, which I showed you last week. I did a review on some of their products. And I'm going to be doing the piece on this paper. So my first course of action is going to be to take this frame apart and trace around the backing, which is going to be the size that we're going to use. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with that, and I'll be right back with you.
Okay, so I have everything taped down with some painter's tape, and I'm just using a little bit of Mars Black because I want to get a nice darkness to the background for this first layer. Now with the painter's tape, if you've used it, you know that sometimes it does exactly what you want it to do, which is keep the paint out, and sometimes a little bit bleeds through. So I'm not going to worry about it too much because we can fix that in the end, and I'll show you how. So I decided to go in with one of my new stamps there with the little bit of the writing on it, and I just went into the wet paint, stamped on it, it removed a little bit of the paint, and then I redeposited it. I want to get that stamp down now because I don't ever like anything to just be laying on top as far as a recognizable image goes. I like it to be kind of hidden underneath and popping out just in places. So I wanted to have some layers on top of it. So I'm going in now with Titan Buff, and that is in Golden's fluid acrylics there. I really like that color a lot. I think it plays nicely with the black, and it's kind of just what I was looking for. I added a little bit of water to it to get the movement going, and I'm spreading it around a little bit with my color shaper there. It obscured some of the writing, but not all of it, and it's doing exactly what I wanted, which was to partially cover it, but still be able to see it in places. I'm just kind of working off the cuff here and making up my decisions as I go, as I like to do. I am an intuitive artist, and that is how I work most of the time. So I'm just kind of grabbing what I feel in the moment is going to look good and adding it to the paper there. I decided I wanted to use a little bit of Golden's Burnt Umber. It's one of my favorite colors, and I use it a lot. So I'm going to go in and just put a little bit of that down on the paper here and spread it around. That's also their fluid acrylic. You could use either one. What I like about this color is it is very translucent, so I can still see everything underneath it, but it's going to warm everything up very nicely. I wanted to have a little bit of warmth in the background. This color specifically because what I'm planning on doing with the flower punch is to use some shades of teal, which is going to complement that color very nicely. So I do have some of that burnt umber that I'm just spreading around everywhere, getting it covered up, not entirely, but just in some places until I reach the level of warmth that I want. I also have some Indian yellow there. That's also in the Golden brand out of the tube that I'm putting on. Just a little bit more warmth, but slightly different to add a little bit more dimension and another layer there. Okay, that's a piece of copy paper that I just set down. Now I am pulling out these collage papers that I made with metal foil on the gel plate, and I will link that video at the end there for you to take a look at if you're interested in seeing how I did that. It's a pretty fun concept that I first saw on Created and Made's channel, and check her out too if you haven't. She has a lot of really cool stuff. So I did those on tissue paper, and that's going to be too flimsy for what I had in mind. So my plan here is just to glue those sheets of tissue down onto backing sheets, and I wasn't sure what I would get the best results from. So I'm trying right here a sheet of copy paper, and I'm just using a little bit of matte medium. That was what came out of that bottle there to glue it all down. That was a piece of copy paper. This here is a piece of rice paper. It has just a little more body to it than the tissue paper, and I wanted to see what was going to work best. So again, gluing this down just with some of that matte gel medium. And the final piece that I use is going to be some of the watercolor paper. It's actually the scrap that I had left over from cutting out the square that I am working the painting on. So here we're still working with the rice paper, again, just smoothing that out, just trying to get most of the air bubbles out. I'm not being super careful about any of this because this isn't going to be the finished piece. It's going to just be something that I'm adding on. So here's my final piece of the foil collage paper on that piece of watercolor paper that I'm going to be using as the backing. As it turns out, the punch does work best with something with a little bit of a heavier body to it, just FYI. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But this was definitely the way to go for this. Not that the other ones didn't work, but this definitely holds up to the pressure of the punch a little bit better. So at this point, I'm ready to take the painter's tape off, and I'm sure you already know this, but a little tip is if you heat that up with the hairdryer, it will pull off less of the paper surrounding it. It'll give you a nice clean pull. I do have a little bit of bleed through there, but we're going to take care of that later on. So this was the first piece that I tried here, and so here's the issue that I was running into with this, and maybe somebody has some suggestions. But once I make the punch and get the little flowers out of it, which I think are just so cute, I'm having an issue getting the remainder of the paper out of the punch. It just wants to grab in there because of all of the fine little pieces on the flowers petals there. It's really hard to get it out of there. I had to work at that a lot and use a couple different tools to make sure everything came out. I, of course, edited all that out for you, but just a word of advice, I didn't have that issue as much with the watercolor paper because it has a little more structure to it. But an FYI, if you're going to do this with one of those punches, that is the case. And if you know any tips or tricks, I will be happy to listen to them. Okay, so I'm getting all of these little flowers cut out, and I'm kind of loosely keeping them into separate piles because I'm going to be I'm going to want to try to not put the same ones right next to each other, at least most of the way through it. If some happen to, that's okay. But I want to try to kind of keep it varied enough so that it looks interesting. You can see here, this is the piece with the watercolor paper, and those just came right out, and I really had very little problem with these ones. But I just love the way these looks, and I can already tell that I'm going to really like this piece. Now that I've got everything cut out, and I'm just going to try to get them slightly organized there, I'm going to work with some placement. So the loose idea I had in my head was to have a kind of spiral design going up from the bottom left-hand side and swirling around up to the top left-hand side. So I'm just placing all of my little pieces down there to get an idea. I didn't want to actually do it as I was gluing it in case I didn't like the way it was going to work. So I just take a few minutes here to work with some placement, and I'm going to be editing a large amount of this out so that you don't have to sit through my whole entire process here. But you can see that as I'm setting them down, what I'm doing with the petals on the flowers is bending them up slightly so that they are more dimensional. I decided that I didn't really want any of them to lie flat on the paper this time. I think it looks much better with them in that upright position. It's just way more visually interesting. So now I have everything kind of placed mostly where I want it, and I'm just using some regular white glue for this here. Now the reason for that, if this was not going to be protected under the glass of the shadow box, I would be a lot more particular about what I was using to glue this down, and I might use something like E6000 or something like that. But here, this is going to be behind glass, so I'm not as worried about somebody walking past and like knocking one of them off, because it can't happen. So you can see that I have a little bamboo skewer there. I'm just pressing that down in the center of each one of these as I glue it, and it helps me center the flower and make everything stand up exactly as I want it. And also I'm really sure this way that I'm getting a good connection between the flower and the paper underneath it. But I am absolutely loving the way this is looking. And I'm trying to think about if there's going to be anything else that I want to do to it. And I can't decide at this point. But once I get this last flower down, I look at it and it just doesn't seem quite finished to me. So this was the point at which I set it aside for a while and just needed to rest on it. Sometimes that's what I do if I'm having a block. I will actually just walk away from it for a few hours, even overnight, and go back, and I can usually decide pretty quickly what it needs. I keep thinking that that big empty section over there on the left really needs something added to it, but I can't decide what I wanted it to be. I thought maybe if I used some of the cutout parts of the flowers as a stencil, that might look interesting, but I ended up not really liking that idea. So again, just kind of took a break from it and decided to come back later. But what I am doing in the meantime is cleaning up some of that bleed through that I got under the painter's tape there, and I'm just using a little bit of titanium white with a small brush and going along the sides and just getting everything straightened out and cleaned up there so that you can't tell that any of that bleed through actually happened. I am blending it out just a little bit because, you know, even though the paper is white and the paint is white, it's not going to be a perfect match. So just kind of blending it into the back of the paper a little bit, which saves me from actually having to paint the whole entire stripe. So what I finally landed on for that empty space was more of that same stencil, but in a white color. So I'm mixing some of my titanium white with a little bit of the matte medium because I want to make it not a stark, bright white on there, but a little more translucent. And I'm doing a couple of test presses on a piece of paper to take even more of it away. And then I'm just going to go ahead and set that down. And I think that added exactly what I needed to make the space seem a little less empty. And here's the final result. I went ahead and got it mounted in my shadow box, and I am really happy with it. I hope you enjoyed this process with me. I'm going to be using this hydrangea punch in a lot more pieces coming up in the future. I have tons of ideas for this. I think these flowers are super cute, and I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. But thank you all for subscribing. If you haven't had a chance yet, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and give me a like if you liked what you saw. These things really help out my channel a whole lot, and I really appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you next week.